Welcome to the Contact Center Perspectives podcast. I'm Steve McDonald, your host. Today, we've got a phenomenal conversation with Mark Smith. Now, Mark, you're not only the founder of JourneySmith, your latest company of four. Not only are you accomplished, you're a PhD in analytics for data. I'm going to let you explain a little bit more about that. You said also you were born and raised in the UK. You spent the last few decades in the United States. You've had four businesses that are transatlantic, that are both US, European based, but they're all have to do with CX, with how do we become better CX leaders from very much a leadership, a consulting, technology perspective. But before we get started here, because our topic today is branded CX is your number one competitive path to 2x your growth. And you've got a study that you want to talk about from McKinsey and some of your own work, and that is going to kind of get us on the right path there. But before we jump in, I'd like to know a little bit more about your background and what you're doing now.
Yep. As you said, Steve, I've had a series of businesses now going back 30 years or so. And key transition for me was probably about 15 years ago. In a way, I transitioned from more marketing technology across the CX technology. And in fact, took some of the things that we'd invented in those early companies. So behavioral analytics, so real understanding of the behavior of customers, tracking the detail of their activity to turn that into a categorization of their behavior, real-time technologies, so making real-time decisions about customers, typically on the point of interaction. And my second company, Portrait, had a massive relationship with Merrill Lynch and Bank of America in the States, where essentially by the end, every single one of their customer touch points across thousands and thousands of branches had our real-time technology as the customer came in, giving the customer service person a real-time recognition of what's the right thing for this customer. And those were very marketing-driven things, but about 15 years ago, made this transition, actually a technology transition. We moved to the cloud. And my third company was Kitewheel, that really was taking that kind of real-time technology, implementing it in a full cloud solution, but also bringing it to CX. And in the customer journey space, we invented journey orchestration. That's a way of using real-time interactions with customers to deliver great experiences to them in the concept of a journey. So multi-step, multi-channel interaction with a customer that goes through time. And it's probably most importantly, it's customer-centric. It's about what the customer's trying to do. It's the customer's journey. They're going through various steps to try and get to their goal. How does a business best help them? How does a business work with them, track them along these steps, and give them the right information at the right time? And so it's this technology-driven, real-time stuff that I've been working on for quite some time. But most recently, the application of that around customer journeys and customer experience.
That puts you in quite a position as an expert to be talking on CX today. And so I'd love to start out with, we all have challenges. CX leaders have very specific challenges. What are the biggest challenges that CX leaders today have to help create long-term sustainable growth in their business?
So I think one of the biggest challenges is actually, you just used the word long-term. It's over the long term that focus on the customer has the real big wins for business. And the big challenge is so many businesses are driven by much shorter term goals and much shorter term targets. And so the way businesses often run these days is the management team and trickling all the way down through the organization. The incentives are put in place on a short term basis and therefore are often very difficult to align with customer centric objectives. They tend to flip quite easily towards cost savings and profit focused measures that tend to drive the behavior of the managers and the leaders in businesses. And unfortunately, that's not often customer centric, because the value of being customer centric, and you mentioned earlier the McKinsey study that we'll talk about later, that looks at businesses over a 10-year cycle. And on that basis, there are huge gains from focusing on the customer. And so it's a real challenge, this misalignment between short-term objectives and long-term big picture customer goals. And that JourneySmith is all about solving that problem and helping businesses put in place incentive plans and team structures and leadership goals that can actually bring these two sides together. so that even short-term objectives can still be in line with the long-term customer centricity goals that a business should be focused on to really beat their competitors.
I know that when you're working with your clients and everything, that they understand the focus and why the long-term focus matters. But it always helps when you have some short-term wins. So if we can accomplish a bit of both, like we can start to show immediate returns as we're building our long-term success. So tell me a little bit about what you think are, with a real dedicated focus on CX, what are some of the short-term wins and what are some of the long-term wins? We can start to understand that.
Yeah, and Steve, you're exactly right. It is all about getting those two things connected. Breaking down the 10-year customer experience cycle, as is the title of this webinar, that can 2x your growth as a business and essentially double you over your competition. That's a long-term thing, but it's got to be broken down, and it needs to be broken down into achievable short-term wins that are customer-centric but can be measured. And so these are things that we at Journeysmiths would call these money journeys, journey by journey initiatives that help a business get step by step more and more customer centric, or part of kind of a long-term plan. But each of them has a short-term measure so that they can feed into the leadership goals and the team goals in a systematic way to build towards that kind of long-term.
So you've mentioned this McKinsey study, and my memory of the McKinsey study was I think it was over 400 companies. They most profitable B2C, B2B companies that had high degree of profitability and largest return on shareholder value. One of the biggest things I took away from that was that McKinsey recommended that actually CX is the number one differentiator for business today. I wanted your point of view and what you additionally took out of that McKinsey report.
One thing I love about it is the name they talk about, and they've sort of branded this thing experience real growth in a business, particularly in highly competitive commodity industries where product differentiation and pricing differentiations become more and more difficult. Experience is the thing that is making the difference. And as you say, they tracked over 10 years, 400 and something companies, and showed that those that put a focus on a better experience for customers outstrip their competition by 2x. Their approach is very much to build leadership teams with these long-term incentive cycles and these long-term goals. That turns out to be a difficult thing. And that's the Journeysmiths approach, is you've got to break it down into these achievable short-term, step-by-step, journey-centric, customer-centric initiatives that each can be measured. And that's one of the key things, and one of the tough things historically in the CX market is proving the value, proving how much this improved experience really delivers, which is why we deliberately call what we do money journeys, to make it very clear this is about the value that's delivered to the customer and back to the business.
You talk about the long-term benefits, and this is a long-term game. Growing our business is long-term. It's a journey that we take. But none of us are going to say we don't want to be customer centric, that we don't want to be customer obsessed. It's like a big job factor. But it looks like a big task to take on. And what I'm taking away from what you're saying is you've got to break it down into bite-sized chunks that are on the short term achievable, that have tangible outcomes, tangible steps to achieve. And that helps. It helps from my perspective in terms of taking on this big daunting task, changing our customer experience. Tell me a little bit about like how you do that, like how you break that down, how you demystify this.
So first of all, I'm going to make a comment because it's really interesting what you say about nobody's going to be not, because I think that's a really interesting point. And I've read a lot of articles recently where people, seems like they're starting to question that. They're starting to say it's too complex and maybe shouldn't be just focused on the customer. And if you dig into it, my point of view is exactly like yours, Steve, which is surely if you really ignore the customer, you're not going to have a business with no customer. And I think some of the confusion there is that really people confuse customer focus and being customer led with customer experience focus, or CX focus and CX led. And I think where it can go too far is if you only measure things in terms of the customer experience metrics, you're only focused on CX, because Customer experience is not the be all and end all for every business, but being customer focused absolutely is. And then being customer focused, you have to be customer focused and customer centric to have a business. You've got to know what customers care about, what products they might be interested in. You've got to sell it to them the right way, market it. You've got to build the right product for the customer, all of those things. But customer experience comes in and does this doubling of your growth in those industries where it's highly competitive, highly commoditized, where the customer cares about the experience. And in that world, you've got to be both customer experience and customer centric. And the customer experience focus really is what then grows the business. And so I like to say being customer focused gets you a business. Being customer experience focused grows your business.
Absolutely. And they're so directly aligned. And bottom line, most businesses today have over 20 to 25 competitors. There is rarely a business and industry segment out there that isn't, I don't want to say commoditized, but highly, highly competitive. And so this is where, in the day and age now where ChatGPT is writing code. So you're a SaaS company, you're a technology company. It used to be product differentiation was the thing that was going to like take you into the future. That is no longer a long-term sustainable competitive advantage that you have. And this focus on CX, as McKinsey put it, one of the biggest differentiator. Another way to say that is it's one of the biggest competitive advantages that you have. And that tie between customer obsessive or customer focused and CX, I had a CMO tell me, he said, Steve, if I understand my customer better than my competition, I will create a better experience for them. So this kind of all ties back to this customer centric to be successful and delivery through CX. It's also integrally tied together.
What we are focused on ultimately at Journey Smiths, and you mentioned it earlier, this branded customer experience. And I feel like that's really the pinnacle when the brand message of the business and the brand values of the business actually directly translate into the experiences delivered to the customer, that they align, that the customer, I always feel like the customer really feels the connection to the business because their experience aligns with the bit. You've got innovative, sexy businesses. That's how it's got to feel. You've got rock solid, high security, high reliability businesses. The customer needs to feel that in their experience, that it aligns with the brand. And then they remember that's that business. And so our whole approach is this branded customer experience. And that's talking about breaking things down. It starts with what are the brand values and which of those translate to real behaviors that we can deliver to the customer. And that delivery is, and next breakdown is alignment between technology and people. Most of these businesses, these with all the competitors and the high competition, they've moved a lot of stuff over to digital channels, and they need digital tools to be delivering the right thing. But they also have people over in the business, whether they're in stores, outlets, whether they're on the phone, in a call center. Customer service has to also live those same values with the customer, and using technology to help them, aligning that technology. So the great smart stuff that happens on the website, that same smart stuff needs to happen in the call center so that those service people are in tune with the brand message and delivering the right experience to the customer.
Something you said in there, it was all fantastic. You said, so the customer feels that experience. And B2C, B2B, the vast majority of the decision making is emotionally based. So you gave that example of to feel the security of the connection. Maybe you're in the networking industry and it's reliability, it's redundant networks and different things. And but you just want the customers to feel that sense of security. I'm a hospital chain. I'm not going to lose my network. I'm an online stock trading company. I'm not going to lose my network connection. It's that security that is a very emotional connection here. When you talk about creating these journeys and breaking the CX down, how much of that is an emotional connection you're trying to make versus a rational connection?
What a great question. And I think we like to think about it as it's a behavioral connection. When we're working with a business and thinking about their brand values, sometimes a business's brand values are a little bit ephemeral and hard to translate to a real feeling, a real emotion with a customer. And so what we guide them towards are to think about brand values that can be translated to behaviors, to ways of actually behaving, ways of talking, ways of communicating, so that they really can be translatable in an emotional connection with that customer. And I can give you a pretty good example, actually, in Southeast Asia. So big organization, 5,000 folks in the customer service area. And we started with the leadership around, so what do you want to be? They were struggling a little bit. This whole initiative was there to drive their competitive position up. And they chose two very kind of emotional things to focus on. They wanted to have the warmest welcome. So these are things that came out of a workshop with the leadership at the bank. The warmest of welcomes for their customers, and then the easiest of experiences. So that was their way of defining actual brand behaviors that were very customer centric, okay, and required them to change the way they were working. So delivering a warm welcome, the people have to really focus on engagement and creating a connection with the customer to be warm. And then making it all easy required them to be proactive and work with the customer and also understand the customer, understand what they were looking for, what journey they were on, so that the bank matched that, and therefore it all appeared easy and convenient to the customer. And so in a way, it's quite simple definition at that top level to select these changes to the way they work with their customers, being warm and being easy. But that's just the start. That's just the start. Getting that defined needs some creativity from the senior folks and us helping them along. It then has to flow down through the organization. So what step two is, okay, we now define these new behaviors. How are we going to track that's really happening? How are we going to track that this is successfully delivered? How are we going to get our people to live this? And so there's then a kind of cascading process where senior leaders become champions for the new process. They help engage their team leaders and their managers, develop new ways for the teams to work that fit these profiles. Technology starts to come into play to feed their people the right prompts to behave the right way and to be intelligent and use the sort of understanding of the customer in the right way. And then an ongoing cycle of learning and weekly workshops, 30 minutes, where the frontline people come together and give feedback. And in the first year that the program was running, there was something like 7,000 updates happen because of the feedback that was coming from the front line. That didn't seem to go down that well with the customer, because we often say it's the frontline people who really know. They're the ones who talk to the customer every day. Right. They're the ones who see the feedback and get the feedback, hear the feedback from the customers. And so putting in place a whole program of using that feedback in the right way that you're getting from the customer and updating the rules, updating the systems to help everybody based on those bits of feedback. And the results have been incredible for this bank. In the first 18 months or so, their error rates are massively down. That's in terms of stats, it's like over 90% of the errors are down. The wait time is hugely down, which I always think organizations tend to get very nervous about. Oh, trying to do too much in a customer interaction, getting too clever, lengthen the customer interaction, but actually not. If you understand the customer properly and use technology, you can speed up those. And we were cutting down waiting time by more than half, big cost efficiencies. And ultimately, they had a 7% growth in the first year in terms of net profit because of this program. It takes these layers of effort and the definition of all these programs, the money journeys that are going to change the way the business interacts with the customer. But it's a great example of delivering in a 12-month period, therefore fitting with this short-term, long-term clash of objectives.
So I'm going to throw you a little bit of a curveball here. We haven't talked about this before. And that is, these are big, large, complex initiatives that take a lot of time. If I'm in an organization that's watching this podcast right now, and I want to start to make these changes, what are some of the things that I should be thinking about? What are some of the things that I should be doing to get us on the right path?
I think maybe that's one of the challenges lots of organizations have, is that they feel that change is a big thing, and it's not. Change is lots of little things. Lots of initiatives can make a change. Now, some organizations maybe have got gaps in some very foundational things like data, maybe some technology gaps. Maybe they got leadership gaps, and they got leaders who don't get it. So there can be big problems to solve for some organizations for sure. And the incremental approach won't necessarily work for absolutely everybody, I would say. But most organizations now have the foundations in place. They've invested in technology, or they've got a great service provider that provides the technology wrapped up as a service. Everybody's been collecting data for years. There's a weird thing out there that people think, oh, it's never quite right. There's always gaps. It's dirty. The AI especially is starting to solve that problem. There's always some data that you can use to do a better job. And it's just a matter of finding out what data is there. And so let's use this, wrap that into an improved process for the customer, ideally prioritized by how much value it's going to deliver and so on. And that's our whole money journeys, is there's probably a first set of 20 things you can do. Let's rank them by the impact they're going to have and the ease to deliver both. And the key thing about ease to deliver is some of it's technology, but some of it's people. Are my people going to be able to do this? Are my service providers people going to be able to do this? I got the right data and technology to do it. So merging that with value allows you to prioritize. These are the top two we should start with, and off you go. So it all starts with wanting to do it and being ready to instigate those programs. But most companies now have got the pieces there. They need to just start a program of building them together and not view it as, oh, it's a 5-year, 10-year project, too scary to add on.
Yeah, there's baby steps that you can take. And what I want to ask is absolutely alignment from the leaders. If the leaders aren't behind this, it's never going to work. What are the right priorities? What are the things that you can take and prioritize? I love that. What's your recommendation on some of the metrics? Because if we know where we want to get, what we want to measure, that's going to help us then prioritize and look at what can we start to roll out? What can start to make a difference? What are some of those metrics that you like to track?
A real big thing there, Steve, is they have to be value metrics. And that's not just value to the company, although that's definitely should be one of them. So the increased profit delivered, the ROI on the project, the actual revenue brought in, those things definitely matter. But value to the customer as well is just perhaps in the long term more important, but value to the customer has to be measured, and it should be really measured. That's not a survey that asks, did you find this valuable? It's that you need to define this improvement in this customer's experience in terms of their time saved, their additional value delivered from your products, the amount of money you saved them, the amount of time you saved them. All those things can be turned into a metric, shows real value to the customer alongside the real value to the business. And I think that's where, going back to something I said earlier, this conflict that seems to be in a lot of the articles you read in CX these days. People are moving away from being too CX focused. I feel like that's when CX's metric is just a customer feedback. You can't make that the only metric because it only gives really a particular slice through what's happening. You have to have real value metrics for both the customer and the business.
You talked earlier about really specific behavioral changes that you wanted to make with the customers. What are the behaviors you're trying to reinforce that will lead to the creation of that value that they're going to feel? If you don't define where you're trying to go, you're never going to get there. So if you can define out these metrics and these behaviors that you're trying to incentivize and track, then you can define what are the things that we're going to do in order to create that. So I think it's a good way of just breaking this down, and it can be very overwhelming, but say, okay, if I break it down into pieces, I'm not going to implement it all at once, but I'm going to start. And then as soon as you start, then the mountains, you start to build and you start to climb that mountain. What I want to do is I want to ask, we've talked about a lot. What haven't we talked about the importance of CX and 2Xing your business and the branded journeys? And what haven't we talked about that you want to make sure we make clear?
I've got one thing, and I actually think I have mentioned it just once, but that's AI. This has maybe been the most AI-free podcast that there's been this year because it's like so all-encompassing. And we haven't talked a lot about that. I'm a big believer that you mentioned earlier. I'm a statistician, so I've been doing kind of AI and predictive analytics for many years. The new wave of AI really is astoundingly more advanced in the way it deals with language and complex, unstructured data. And I think there's a real power coming from that in this area of helping with the data challenge. that every organization's got lots of systems. They got their own systems, service providers' systems. Each channel has a different system. Each system has data in it. And that's part of the challenge. It's messy, it's dirty, there's gaps. AI is really going to solve that. And in particular, agentic AI, where these agents will be able to go out and they'll understand the data structures and be able to match them up between those different systems. That technology is going to drastically change the way companies can actually use data on the customer, because this new wave of AI is going to make it so much simpler to get a clean view of all of your customer data and understand the behaviors of all the customers across those different channels. So that's probably the one thing that I feel like we hadn't spent much time on, perhaps deliberately, but worth adding in that AI really is good. I'm not a believer in the whole AI is going to remove the CX industry from a existence and professional at all. One of our big things is this is a human thing as well as a technology thing. People are always going to be in the link. The real human connection is going to be there in every business, but AI is going to help as well. It's really going to help.
Well, I have to say that I'm almost 100% sure there's going to be a lot of questions to come after that we put this out. Is it okay if we give a link to your LinkedIn profile that people could reach out to you with questions?
Yeah, absolutely. We can do that. You find me.
Mark, thank you so much for coming on and sharing with us. And one of my big takeaways is that we just have to get started. You just have to start. And it will become less and less scary as we get into it. And we start to see the short term and longer term benefits. So thank you for coming on today and sharing and kind of giving us a whole new level of inspiration to make something out of our data, make something out of our CX interactions, and 2X our business.
Steve, it's been a real pleasure. Thanks so much for having me. I've enjoyed it a lot.